Chof Gimel Amud Aleph. We'll begin Chof Beis Amud Beis at the Mishnah towards the bottom. So the Mishnah Hayayim B'Tfilah. If a person was in the middle of Shemona Esrei, V'nis Dirshu Bal Keri, then he reminded himself that he was a Bal Keri. Lo Yafsik. He should not stop the Shemona Esrei. He should not stop in the middle. Eli Katsa. He should shorten it. He should do a short form. So different explanations on how to do short form, but some Rishonim say just the very beginning of the bracha and just the end. So again, we were talking at the time, the Zera, that Bal Keri was also B'Divrei Torah, was also B'Tfilah. So if he remind himself in the middle of Shemona Esrei, Yikatzer, he has to shorten the Shemona Esrei. Yara Litval, if person went to be Toivel, he was Tomei, and he went to be Toivel, Im Yochala Lois Ulis Kasas. If he can finish the tefillah and dress himself, cover himself prior to Netzacham, so then thereby he would be able to say Kriya Shema prior to the Netz, then then he should be toivel and then clothe himself and say Kriya Shema. But being love, if there's not enough time to recite the Kriya Shema prior, then Yiskasa b'mayim v'yikra. Then he should cover himself with the water as in order to say the Krishna, recite the Krishna. But the preferred time, he should cover himself with the water. But he should not cover himself with mayim that has a foul odor, and not with water where flax was soaked in the water. Unless he dilutes it first with water. So it's much from Rashi that this is not a continuation of Mei Mishra, because Mei Mishra just diluting it with a little water will not really dilute it. So it's mayim. It's that it's going back on the previous case on the Mei Raglayim. He should not cover himself with Mei Mishra. And Mei Raglayim, he should not recite Krishma in front of the Mei Raglayim, the urine, unless he dilutes it. And how much does he have to distance himself? Rashi says, we're talking here again, Mei Raglayim, Umin Hatzaya, and from excrement, Dalet Amas. He has to distance himself Dalet Amas before reciting. See the Gemara if he was reciting Shemona Esrei, he remembered he was a Bal Keri, and similarly, if he is reciting the Torah, he reminds himself he's a Bal Keri, he doesn't stop short, but he slurs the words, he doesn't enunciate it clearly, he just slurs the word v'ker. A Bal Keri, if he's Ker B'Torah, and the Tzibor, then no more than 3 psukim he should say. That's the maximum that he should say is Ker B'Torah, because the minimum amount that you can lane is 3 psukim. The minimum amount of laning is 3 psukim. So therefore, 3 psukim already has the minimum required amount for the aliyah, then he should do no more than that. He's not allowed to do any more than that because he has the minimum that's required to be oil v'tzayra, and then he should not say any more. If he was David, and then he saw that there was soy keneg, there was excrement in front of him, he walks in front of him, he walks forward, so that it is behind him, at least Dalet Amas behind him. Frankly, more of we learn in the Brisa that he doesn't have to go forward, he can go to the side. If it's possible, the preferred way is that it should be behind him. He should go in front forward so that it's behind him. That's the preferred way. But if it's lo yefshar, if there's for instance, a river in front of him, there's a highway in front of him, he can, then he goes to the start, he goes to the side. and he found that in the place that he was, there was Soivim Kaima. Amar Rabba Afal Pi Shechalta Tfilosa Tfilah. He says that even though he was Chata, he shouldn't have davened in that place. But the tefillah is still a tefillah. What do you mean? How could the tefillah be considered a kosher tefillah, valid tefillah? This is considered teiva, abomination. He should not have davened in such a place. As Taisus points out, we're talking in a place where he should have known that there was a possibility where there was tzaya. In the general terms, just in those days, they didn't have indoor plumbing, they didn't have bathrooms, etc. Much the basic kisei in many places were in the open fields, and therefore there would be tzaya lying on the ground. So if it's in a place where a person should have suspected that it would be used as a basic kisei, then the person is considered negligent for not examining beforehand, for not checking it out before he started to daven. So Rabbi asked, in such a case, he said, even though he davened, it's filoso taiva, and as Taisus points out, therefore he has to repeat the Shemana Esrei. He has to repeat it. He's not yoytze with what he said because he was a toiva. Now, in the previous case that we learned, he's oimid tefillah and he's roid soya just as mahalach lefonah, and which is mashma that he goes in front of him and he continues. So the way Taisus is explaining, though, we understand it. In the previous case, where he was not considered negligent, he would not have known or shouldn't have assumed that there was soya over there. And he davened, and it happened to be that there was. In such a case, he's not considered negligent. It's not considered Zevach Roshem Teiva. And in that case, he walks forward at least Dalet Amas so that it's behind him, and he can continue. Over here, where Rava says that he has to repeat the Shemana Esrei, is where it's considered a Teiva. Where he was negligent, he should have known and checked before he started to daven. He was davening, and he couldn't control himself, and the urine was dripping on his knees. He stops until the water stops, until it stops dripping. And then he can continue his chayzer and mispal. He can continue and down. So now, as the Rishonim mentioned over here, it has to be that the way Taisus is learning al kol panim, that there is not there's two lashonis actually in Taisus, whether it's absorbed into the ground or absorbed into his garment, where it's not there, the urine is not nikir, or perhaps that even if it's not, since the Isser over here is only the Rabbanan, by Meiraglaim, the Isser is if it's only Keneged Ha'amad, Keneged the flow, but if it's not, it's a Rabbanan. The other Lashon and places and other Rishonim are that even if it's not absorbed. So he waits, where does he go back to? He has to start from the very beginning. He has to start from the beginning. And then the whole that it's no lamakam shepasak, he just continues from where he stopped, and he continues on from there. So lema b'hakim, if let us say that the machlekes is as follows: Maras Savrim Shagedei Ligimaras Kula. Let us say that we're talking in a case where the pause was enough time to recite the entire Shemona Esrei from beginning to end. So let us say we're talking in such a case where he paused long enough to recite the Shemona Esrei from beginning to end. And the question is, then, if there is such an interruption, such a long interruption, does one have to go back to the beginning? So let us say that if there was such a long interruption, enough time that you could have recited the whole Shemona Esrei, you must go to the beginning. And that one says, no, even if we're such a long interruption, you do not have to go back to the beginning. That can't be the pshat. It shouldn't say that. It should say clearly, im shav im lo shav. The Lashon of the Brisa is he waits till it's Pasuk Hamayim, and then he continues. Now, if we're talking specifically in such a case where he's shocked, it should have been spoken out clearly. Ella, Rav Ashi says it's not. What is the machlekes over here? Everybody holds that if the interruption was long enough to complete the whole amount, you have to go to the beginning. The Hasam of the Loishok. In the Bryce, it's talking where the interruption was not that long. The Marasam regarding the Chuyahu, Vein Roy, Vein Chilosa Tvil. One holds that the Gavar is the Chuyahu. Why is it the Chuyahu? Because we're talking in a case, as Rashi points out, where he had the urge to relieve himself prior to starting Shemona Esrei. So he should not have commenced Shemona Esrei in that state. He should have relieved himself prior to starting the Shemona Esrei. So one holds that he is therefore a Gavar D'Chuyahu, and therefore the Tefillah is not accepted. And even if he didn't pause long enough, Ligmar's Kula, it's not an acceptable tefillah. He has to go back to the beginning. He says, no, even though certainly he should have, it would have been preferred if he had relieved himself prior to starting Shemona Esrei, but he's not considered a Gavar D'Chuya because of that. The tefillah that he did daven up until the point where it says is considered an acceptable tefillah. If a person has to go to the bathroom, he should not daven. And if he did, then it's considered tfilosa toeva. It's considered that the tefillah is considered a toeva. It's not acceptable. That's only if he could not hold himself back. Then it is acceptable. It is acceptable if I'll call upon him, even though he had the urge, but he is able to restrain himself. Then he holds the tefillah is a tefillah. Vad kama? How long is it the period of time that he has to be able to restrain himself? He has to be able to walk the distance of a parsa, 8,000 amas. Some say that this, what they just mentioned, is going on the Bryce itself. That this difference of whether they can restrain himself or not is really the Lashon of the Bryce, not what the Maraim say. But the Maraim speaks out that it's only said that the tefillah is teiva if he can't restrain himself. If he can restrain himself, tefillah. Vad kama. Now, the ad kama, to clarify the last point, how long does he have to be able to restrain himself? So it's on that point, and specifically that point, Rav Zid, ad parsa, Rav Zid said, he's just referring to that question. Rav Zid said, and the Bachskir says, Rav Zid, Rav Yehuda, ad parsa. Rabbi Shmuel Melech ben Rabbi Yonasan, if a person has to relieve himself, he should not daven. Shen mishum shenemar, the success he can likras alekecha Yisrael. You have to prepare yourself before you approach Hashem, before you daven. So he should relieve himself before he starts davening. So literally, the pasuk is saying, "Kahelas, guard yourself where you go to the base of Mikdash." But we darshan, "Shmor atzmacha, guard yourself, shalei techta," so that you don't do an avera. V'im techta, if you do, have a korban lefanim, v'karav l'shmai. Omer Rava. Yes, it's a different shot. He says, "Ave karav l'shmoya divrei chacham." The karav l'shmoya is on a different matter. He says, "Ave karav l'shmoya divrei chacham." Listen to the divrei chacham. She'im chaytim evim korban v'yisem tshuva. Because follow the example of the chachamim, who they do an avera, they bring a korban, but it's not just that they bring a korban; they do tshuva. Matas aksim l'zevach. The fool is the matas aksilim is a zevach. The fool brings the korban. What does that mean? Al teik aksilim. Don't be like the fool shechaytim mavim korban v'nei noisim tshuva. The fool only brings the korban. He thinks that if he brings the korban, he'll appease the Rabbeinu Shalom. No, don't be like the aksilim. Ki enim yodim lasos ra. Because the continuation of the pasuk is because they don't know how to do evil. Correctly, more. What do you mean if they don't know how to do evil? They're tzaddikim if they don't know how to do evil. Ella, what it means is al teik ksilim shechaytim mavim korban vein yodim im alach toivahim mavim alaroim mavim. Don't be like the fools who don't know what they're doing. They bring a korban, they don't know if they're doing it for something good, for something bad. They don't do tshuva. They don't really understand what they're doing. Follow divrei chachamim. Have a karav lishmaya divrei chachamim. Listen to the chachamim. If they do a chet, they do tshuva. They know why they're bringing the chet, what to bring the korban for. They know what for chet they're bringing it for. Don't be like the ksilim who are unaware of their actions and are not aware of really what they're doing and do not do tshuva. So the ksilim, they bring the korban and they don't know im tayam ra and ein yodim lasas ra. They don't know if it's for good or bad. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu Rabbeinu Shalom says bein toiv l'ra ein mavchinim. They can't distinguish between good and bad. Ve'im mevin korban lefonai, and they bring me a korban. Rav Ashi v'teim Rav Huna bar Papa Amar, which relates more to our topic. They darshan as follows: Shmor nekavecha b'shol shat ha'omed betfila lefonai. It's Shmor nekavecha. So it's supposed to say Shmor ragelcha, guard yourself, meaning examine yourself and examine yourself if you have to relieve yourself. Shmor ragelecha kasher telach beis lakim. If you're coming to Hashem, you're coming to daven to the Rabbeinu Shalom. So in this context, basically, to the base of Migdash, it's examine yourself before you come to daven to Hashem. So make sure you examine yourself, and if you have to, relieve yourself. If a person comes into a basic kise, and again, like we said before, the basic kise in those days, the basic kise were in the fields, and in those fields there was tzoya lying on the field or meraglaim, depending on the case. So if a person nechnas a basic kise, in those days they used to wear tefillin a whole day. He has to remove his tefillin 4 amas, at least 4 amas away before he gets to the basic kise, and then he goes into the basic kise. He should not go into the basic kise with his tefillin. He says that's only a basic kise kavua, that's established as a basic kise, meaning so therefore we assume that there is tzoya on the ground. But if it's not permanent, then he does not have to remove it dalet ames away before he gets to the basic kise. But when he leaves, then he does not put it on immediately. He only puts it on when he's 4 amas away from the basic kise, because now it has become, he has made it into a basic kise kavua. So now it has a din basic kise kavua, where tefillin cannot be worn within dalet amas of the basic kise. How can he go into basic kisa kavua to be mashed in mayim, not to relieve himself, not from gedolim, not from tzoyim, but to urinate? Ravina Shorei Ravada Bar Masna also. He says it is also why Hashin Shema Yifna Behem. We're chayshish that he might Shema Yifna Behem. We're afraid that he might, if he's in that type of a basic kise, then he might relieve himself in any event. He might forget himself and relieve himself. So it's also, but Amillah are different reasons, Shema Yafiach Behem. We're afraid that Shema Yafiach Behem, that he might pass gas, he might be Mafiach, so therefore we do not allow him to do it. Well, then the question arises, if during the process of urinating, we're afraid Shema Yafiach Behem, what does it have to do with a basic kise arai, a basic kise kavua? And we're only talking over here about a basic kise kavua. The shaila is, can he go to basic kise kavua lahashtin mayim? Taisus points out, because since it's the regilus in a basic kisei kavua to be mafiach, we're afraid in those surroundings, in that circumstance, he will forget himself and we're chosh Hashem yafiach. But a basic kisei arai, we don't have that same concern. He removes them 4 amos away, and he puts it in an opening in a cavity or a cubby, which are somach to the Rishus HaRabim, which are facing the Rishus HaRabim. And then he goes into the bathroom. When he leaves, he has to distance himself away from the basic kisei, and then he can put us tefillin back on. That's the sheet of Beis Shammai. No, we don't do that. We say, notwithstanding that it is more kovadik, it is much more kovadik to remove it before going in, but we're afraid that if he leaves it lying over there, it will be not protected properly, whether from robbers, whether from mice. So therefore, Beis Hillel, he holds it, he removes it, but he holds it in his hands and he goes in. Rabbi Kiva Omer, similar to Beis Hillel, but with a variation. Rabbi Kiva Omer, he holds it in his beged, he puts it in his beged, and then he goes in. Practically more of a big he just leaves it in his beged. Maybe he'll forget and it'll fall down. What he means to say is, he wraps it in his clothing, holds it in his hand, so he has it in his hand, he's not going to forget, and therefore we're not afraid it's going to fall, and he's nechnas. And he puts it alternatively in the chayrim in holes in that are somach to the basic kisei. But he should not, as Beis Shammai suggests, he should not put it in the chayrim which are somach to the Rishus HaRabim. He should not put it in over there, because we're afraid that people might take it. People walking by, robbers, unscrupulous people might take them. And it will come l'dei chashad, will be suspicion. What type of suspicion over here? Like the following Maisa. There was a Maisa with the Talmud that's what he did. He put it in the holes in the cubbies in the walls facing the Rishus HaRabim. As Zaina passed by, and she took them. And she came into the base of Medrash. She said, she showed the tefillin. She said, look what so-and-so, this Talmud, look what he gave me for a reward for znus. Look what he gave me a reward for having relations with him. So, of course, she was slandering him. Kevin Shisham Talmud, and the tragedy arose. He heard what happened and what she was saying about him. So Kim Shisham Oisa Talmud Kach, Ola Laroisha Gag, he went to the rooftop, and Nafal Mason, he fell and died. After that Maisa, they made a takona, she oixen the big day beyond nefnas, that he should hold it in his hands and go in. And initially they put it in the holes that were samach, in the holes on the ground, some of the basic kisei, but mice would come and take them. The Rasaken, that he should put it in the other cubbies facing the Rishus HaRabim. However, but the passerbys would sometimes take them. So so after that, they're Rasaken, that notwithstanding that it's more bekovadik to remove it before coming into the basic kisei, but because of the problems and because of the need for shimur of the tefillin, they were sakin that he holds it in his hands in nefes. What's the halacha goyla kimin sefer v'ayachsim b'yamina keneged libay? He rolls it up like a sefer and he puts it on keneged leiv, keneged his heart. He's rolling it up in the ritzuas and the straps, but the straps should not hang down a tefach, dragging down. This is mentioned over here only when there's still time after he leaves the basic kisei. There's enough time in the day to put them back on. As tefillin can only be worn during the daytime. So we're only talking in a case where there's enough time in the day where after he relieves himself, he can still put on his tefillin before nighttime. But if there's not enough time to do that, what he does is he makes like a pouch that has a tefach airspace, and he puts them in that pouch, and it's considered a separation between him and the basic kisei. In the daytime, he rolls it up in the tzuas and the straps, and he puts it, holds it connected his heart. He makes a pouch for them that has a tefach of airspace, and he puts it there. That the requirement of a tefach space is only if it's in its own keli, if it's in its own receptacle or its own pouch, the one that's normally used for the tefillah. But if it's not normally used for that, it would still be considered to be a chatzitza, even if there's less than a tefach space. It's still considered to be in a separate compartment, and it would be permitted. Omar Mar Zutritim Ravashi Tain, I'll prove that to you, because we find that in an oil of maize, that a klicheres, which is not makabel tuma from the outside, only from the inside, if it's covered, if it's sealed, then it protects everything that's in the klicheres from tuma. Now the din is that even pachim ketanim are matzel. It doesn't have to have a tefach, a cavity of a tefach space. Even if there's small little vessels, and they're closed, they also will protect anything that's inside of it from being makabel tuma. So you see that to be considered in a separate space, you do not necessarily need a tefach of space. So therefore, here also, where do we say you need dafka tefach of space? That's if it's in its own pouch. It's not considered a separate compartment since it's its own pouch unless there's a cavity of a tefach. But otherwise, even if there is less than a tefach, it's still considered to be in a separate compartment and not in the basic kisei. However, Tosfos points out there has to be some space. Otherwise, if it's just a wrapper, if it's just wrapping it, then it's like something that's covered with tit or covered with mud. That's not considered to be a chatzitza. That's just a covering for the item. It does not render it into a separate place.